All right, everyone. Hello, hello. We're gonna get started. Welcome, friend. As people trickle in, I'll get started with the event of the day, which is our summer fiction book club and our final one of the series. And so thank you to those of you who have joined us for all three, and welcome to those just joining us for the first time. You have arrived at the Summer Fiction Book Club series, and today we will be discussing Cloud Cuckoo Land by Pulitzer Prize winning author Anthony Doerr. My name is Madeline Bujo-Hart, and my pronouns are she, her. I serve as the program associate of the BTS Center, and I'm happy to welcome you. I'm glad to be joined today by our communications manager, Ash Temin, as well as our guest conversationalist. There you are, Ash. Tory Stephens. Hi, Tory. The BTS Center is the organizational successor to the Bangor Theological Seminary, and we are located in Portland, Maine, on lands long stewarded by the Wabanaki, the people of the dawn. We seek to catalyze spiritual imagination with enduring wisdom for transformative faith leadership, and are focused on spiritual leadership for a climate-changed world. I would like to extend a special welcome to all of you gathering live today, as well as a warm hello to those of you who may be watching the recording. At this point, I would like to invite you to put on your digital name tags indicating how you would like to be known in the space, and to say hello to your fellow summer fiction book club readers in the chat. And we'll do that with a couple of questions I've crafted for you. The first one being pretty easy. Where are you logging in from today? Waterville, California. Oh, hi, Charlene. South Portland, great. Iowa, Western Mass, nice. Air. Oh my gosh, Oregon. Cool. Alaska. Whoa. Okay, you might get the prize for today for farthest zooming in. Second question, you can keep putting in where you're logging in from. Whose storyline in the book particularly intrigued you? There were a couple strong threads, and which one really got your goat? You can pop that in the chat too. Yeah, Omir. Constance, Seymour. I know all these characters. I'm so glad we get to talk with them. Zeno. Great. Again, keep going with 1 and 2. The last one is sort of a logistical question, as I'm going to be putting you all into breakout groups depending on your answer to this. The question is, how far have you gotten in reading Cloud Cuckoo Land? And it's a big book, so there's no shame. Options being, are you finished? Are you almost finished? Or are you hoping to read it sometime in the near future? And whatever you choose is great. It's just going to help me put you into the right groupings to have the richest dialogue you can. So feel free to continue to share in the chat, and thank you for doing that. And thank you for showing up in this space and for choosing to spend time with us on this particular day and with this particular group of people to discuss Cloud Cuckoo Land. And with that, I'm going to invite Ash to the forefront.
All right. Thank you so much, Madeline. And it's so good to see you all here this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are zooming in from. It is just past noon here in Portland, Maine, where I am located. And as Madeline said, I am the communications manager here at the BTS Center, and it is a great joy for me to get to be with you to discuss books, which is not something that I normally get to do in my job. So I'm very happy to be here today. As we begin our time together, I invite you to find a comfortable position. If you haven't found one already, you might like to grab a beverage or to have a candle or a lamp or whatever makes you feel cozy as we chat through the book, make you feel like maybe you're in a library, which is one of the big through lines in this novel. Whatever makes you feel comfortable, please do. The Summer Fiction Book Club, some of you might have been to our previous sessions this summer, but it is based on the BTS Center's belief that good stories do something that we really need, especially right now. The books reveal present realities and imagine possible futures. Fiction both names hard truths and also serves as a window through which we glimpse compelling and creative visions of social, ecological, political, and economic possibilities. Through a good story, the voices of the marginalized, silenced, or forgotten can speak their truth to power. They can also give witness to the experiences shared by human and other than human communities most affected by climate change in all places. Because we live in a time of profound spiritual and ecological crisis, the multi-species world needs spiritual practitioners and leaders who understand that just transformation is possible when better stories are told and received. So as Madeline shared, this year we've been reading Cloud Cuckoo Land, written by the Pulitzer Prize winning Anthony Doerr. I just had a peek in the chat, and it does look like a lot of you who are here have finished the book or read it twice. It is certainly one that I found hard to put down myself. And in case you needed a little synopsis, which you probably don't, but I'll give it to you anyway, Cloud Cuckoo Land brings together an unforgettable cast of dreamers and outsiders from past, present, and future to offer a vision of survival against all odds. Bound together by a single ancient text, these tales interweave to form a tapestry of solace and resilience and a celebration of storytelling itself. Anthony Doerr's novel is a tale of hope and profound human connection. And as you probably all know, this novel holds so much more than a short description can encompass. And so I'm really excited to chat with you about it today and to be joined by Tory Stephens, who's our guest conversationalist. And I will introduce him in just a moment. Before we begin, I'll give you a quick overview of how today will roll, which is that we'll hear from Tory first. He'll be giving us some of his thoughts on the novel, and then we'll move into a section where we'll have breakout rooms. So you'll have a chance to chat with your fellow bookworms about this novel in small groups. And then after about 25 minutes of that, we will come back together and you'll have an opportunity to drop some questions that you may have been thinking about while you read the book or may have arisen in your small group conversation into the chat so that Tory and I can engage with those in our final segment of conversation. And then we will wrap up and send you on your way. So now I am very delighted to introduce Tory Stephens, who is our guest conversationalist today. Tory Stephens creates opportunities that transform organizations and shift culture. He is a resource generator and community builder for social justice issues, people, and movements. He currently works at Grist magazine as their climate fiction creative manager and uses storytelling to champion climate justice and imagine green, clean, and just futures. In another life, he owned a kick-butt streetwear company, and he would have gotten away with eating the last cookie too if it weren't for his 3 meddling kids. I have to say that's maybe one of my favorite bios that I've ever come across, Tory. So welcome. We're so happy to have you here. And I think we should just dive in. And there are so many compelling themes, stories, interwoven narratives in this novel. And I'm just wondering what is feeling most alive and resonant for you as we start this conversation.
Yeah, appreciate that. And hello to everyone from Massachusetts. I so th in my work with climate fiction, we're often discussing behind the scenes and even on Zooms like this with other people, the importance of story, the structure of story, how narratives motivate people. In fact, the project I manage, Imagine 2200, Climate Fiction for Future Ancestors, was conceived so that we could motivate people who weren't motivated by the news. We
Mm.
wanted to motivate individuals who care about the climate, but they don't like getting their orientation from the around what they want to talk about the climate. The news doesn't motivate them to kind of like, it's not where they want to spend their time. They want to spend their time talking about story, characters, and world building and things of that nature. And this story has that in spades. There is so many amazing characters, the interweaving of stories, the narrative structure. I mean, it is really a class act when it comes to storytelling. That celebration of stories, as it talks about on the book jacket, I think was really apt. And so some of the concepts that we deal with, story, narrative, creating kind of a environmental literacy, um, the myth and faith and belonging that you need to kind of motivate an individual are things that we think about in my work from a kind of philosophical but practical point. It's like both of those things. And this story has it, these characters and how much they're motivated by the stories that in how we all like that's what I felt like so related to the characters because we're all motivated by some sort of narrative or story, right? What's the overarching? I really do. After this book, I was like, what is my like what like right now, what are the main drivers? What are the main narratives that are driving me as an individual? And if you look at if you think about your family and your friends and the people in your life, they're all have like this core story structure that's motivating them, right? And that's the same for these characters, from Anna to Seymour. They're like just motivated by these things in their life. And but there's also a point in your life, where your narrative can shift or can crack or break. And I think there's like two things that really are holding true in the story is that stories are motivating people. And then there's a moment where that like, changes. There's something that changes everything for this particular person. And that can be true of our lives as well. Um, and one of the places I really saw that like on that I would like to highlight um is with Omir, where everything is moving from Omir to just be a part of this thing, and to kind of move with the rest of the kind of like Muslims that are looking at this other world of, the Christian world as something that is like, you know, they have this whole story structure that is telling them that this is not right and that there's all these myths around, which is a part of the story around what Christians do behind those walls and like drinking and eating wine and just being filthy and things of that nature. Like, one thing I always talk to people about when they're asking me, how do you conceive of and build a narrative, is that it takes 1,000 points of light or 1,000 stories. So like there's the big narrative structure that you all are, believing in, but there's the small things too, like those small little descriptions of Christians in like a not great light add to motivating people to kind of see those people as other, as evil, as bad, as different. There's the overarching structure, and then there's the little like small pieces that help you. And when Omir decides that he doesn't want to be a part of this story and turns around, I think is so powerful because it's hard to kind of turn around from the story that's been motivating you for your entire life, you know and we can talk about maybe later like why did that happen with Emir, what was the cracks that started, was it yeah, so I think that would be an interesting thing to discuss as well. Um, my favorite character in the book was Anna, mainly because of just like the adventurous kind of free will, scrappy young girl who's not scared of things that like you should be really like quite fearful of, like, to sneak into like an old library um and steal books and know that like probably death or like torture might even be involved if you get caught, is just wow. I was like on my edge of my seat, just like wow. But there's another core component of that story to me, is the like there's a lot about story here. There's a lot about belonging and how that is core to story. And like, we there, in this country right now, there's a sense of a lack of belonging. And many people talk about it. There's deaths of despair that are happening. And so belonging is something that, religious organizations provide, unions, bowling leagues, and in this like instance, Anna is rejecting in a way like the full belonging, even from the beginning. There's like this free will kind of impulse in her to kind of just not go the way that all the other seamstress in that work are doing, and end up becoming more literate because of their free will and curiosity. And that changes and allows different parts for a new story to kind of be built within her that isn't based on these grand narratives that motivate most people, especially people in her society. And I thought that that was like just very compelling and interesting about her story. Uh, and I think like everyone here, all the people are searching for a sense of belonging, and these narratives and stories provide that sense of belonging. Um, I I really, it's one of the things I think about a lot, with climate fiction, trying to popularize a genre that is not too old and get it into the hands of various people. What I found that has worked and been most effective is, I don't know, I want to use the word curing a sense of belonging, but adding a space, a third space, like we are here today, convened to discuss and talk story, using story as a place to find community is like essential to story in a way. Like if you show like there's 2 points in that I really, and I know I'm hammering this, is like stories add a sense of belonging. They help you find your community. They help you kind of mitigate values in life. But there is a point where they can break and the narrative can break. And the narrative that my goal as a creative in this space of climate that I've been trying to work at is that there's a lot of doom and gloom around us even like surviving this. Like, you ask the climate crisis, a lot of people have some doom and gloom idea that we can't get out of this. And my work tries to focus us so that we are focused on the positive, the climate solutions, the hope, the working together, the community, the sense of belonging that we can come together and accomplish this crisis or get out of this crisis and have a livable planet. Um, yeah, so like I really, on a meta level, really appreciated this book coming into my life at this time, because it made me think about the philosophical and deep things around story, belonging, narrative, the myths we tell each other. And I really wanted to, think through what is it that works? What works to help change people's kind of narrative? Because there's a lot of people with the narrative that we're not going to make it, because things are too far gone. And I think it's more people to kind of convene and have a discussion around these things. And I always say this thing at some of the talks that I give is the weirdest thing to talk about, which shouldn't be weird, is hope. Like if you ask, like go, like when's the last time you talked to your family member or your neighbor around hope? Like that would seem weird, right? Like, hey, neighbor, like let's not talk about the weather this time. Let's talk about hope. Like, like we just don't have that level of community. And that for me means something's broken. Um, why it shouldn't be weird to talk about hope, you know, when it's something that we all need, and to get through this, we need hope. And we all carry some hope in us. Um, so yeah, the book for me just like is a real touchstone to the things that I care about a lot. What is narrative? What is story? In I don't always think of these things as adding like what's the value of a narrative? What's the value of a story? I have to do that in my work. I just love a good story, and this book is an amazing story. So I love it on face value just because it's entertaining, the characters are beautiful, and that sort of thing. But then my like other side of my brain goes to, okay, what am I learning here? What am I like? What can I use in my work to help, all those folks that think it's, we're not going to make it? Because I think for every person that we can turn from this idea that we can't make it to we can make it, no one actively sits in the position, well, not no one, but not many people sit in the position of we can make it and then doesn't do something. If you believe we can make it, you're going to work towards that in big and small ways. So turning people to that narrative is a huge part of my role. And so, yeah, I think you're frozen for me. Are you frozen? No. Can you hear me still?
No, well, you were frozen for me there for a second, so maybe we're frozen for each other. But yeah, thank you. That I really love that reframing of like we're um being able to imagine something different, imagine something hopeful. And for me, I was thinking about as you were talking, like this novel, all of the characters are living in a time of profound crisis and change, and like there's so many forces around them that are out of their control. Like Anna and Omir are in this time of like war and conquest, and then the sort of Zeno and Seymour in this time of like we're experiencing these like deep throes of climate change and development, and then you have Constance who's in this like very different environment, but um still in a world that's kind of unrecognizable. And through this all we have this like sort of weird little myth that's
Yeah.
binding them all together, right? It's like a little absurd and funny, and it itself is broken, because there are pieces that are missing, and there's this, that, and the other. And yeah, I wonder, I mean, we'll go to breakout rooms soon, but like I'm curious to what you think about that kind of like use of the narrative where it's like there are these crisis points, and then there's this little through line of this other story that's binding these stories together.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it was a neat trick to be able to like pull the book together and weave it, but it was also like bringing our attention to, again, how powerful stories are and how lasting and enduring they can be. Do they sit in the mouths of people? Do they live in the kind of written word? Are there parts that we have to make up because like some of it just doesn't exist? Like if you have children and you've read a book and maybe they've torn a page out or something's happened, you've gotten to that point in the book and you're like, oh, and then the dinosaur, got into a space rocket, like you're making it up, and like all these different myths that were passed along, a lot of them weren't written at the time. Um, a lot of these different myths weren't written at the time, so they were sometimes exaggerated, added on. There was so many things that were like brought to the story that were maybe had a cultural flavor. Maybe the Turkish folks told it different than the Greeks, and things of that nature. So, but this idea of weaving this myth, I think, really just focuses our attention again on the fact that stories can move through time and space in a way almost like no other thing can that we have. and it depends on us being literate and caring about these stories and like feeling like, oh, there's some value here. Like we don't just tell these stories just, I mean, yes, there's entertainment factor. Maybe there's some values you want to impart to your community or loved one. So yeah, I really appreciated that aspect of the book. Just again, the celebration of stories.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, okay. I know we could talk about this book all day, just the two of us, but I'm going to give everyone an opportunity to hop into some breakout rooms. I think, Madeline, are you feeling ready to put people in breakout rooms? Great. So we will have you in groups of 4 or 5 probably, and you will have an opportunity to discuss. We have a few prompts for you, although please use them as guides and feel free to go in whatever direction the spirit of the group moves you. Madeline will pop these in the chat, but the questions that we've offered are, what role does time play in this book? What is Doerr saying about past, present, and future? How do you make sense of the layered themes and intersecting threads of this book? There's war, there's futurism, there's eco-terrorism, there's love, there's learning, there's libraries, there's so many things. And then a little bit of what Tory and I have been chatting about, like in this climate change world, what is the role of story, or what are the roles of story, and perpetuating narrative? And then finally, what do you think the call or the invitation of this book is? Like, what's it bringing out in you? What's it kind of awakening in you in terms of your life and your work? So we will, our gentle prompt for keeping you in going is that we invite the person who most recently celebrated their birthday to be the gentle facilitator for the group, just to keep an eye on time and make sure that everybody who would like to have a turn to speak gets a turn to speak. So you can determine once you get in your group who that person is. You can have a little introduction of each other and then dive into whatever one of these questions or question is alive for you right now. And we will bring you back in about 25 minutes. So Madeline, I give it to you. Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope that you had really rich conversations in your small groups. And I'm excited to hear what you were talking about and what your questions are. So as we return and get ready for the next phase of our conversation, I would invite you to take a couple minutes of just shared quiet and share your questions and wonderings in the chat. If there were specific questions that came up in your conversation that you'd love to hear some more about with Tory and I, or if you had a really aha insight moment, we would love to hear about that too. So if we just take a couple minutes and you can drop those in the chat, and Madeline will be keeping an eye there, and we will be pulling some of those questions for this next part of our conversation. Yeah, so I see some questions coming up about story, and this question that June has about wondering what stories I or we are telling about climate catastrophe. And I think, Tori, that kind of goes back to something that you were talking about a little earlier about like how do we if there's one dominant narrative, like how do we kind of break the narrative. I love that language that you use of like the narrative breaks at a certain point, and like I wonder about like how we participate in that breaking. And one of the things that came up in conversation was around, Omir is there. He's been drawn in by this like this big narrative about we have to go and take this city, and he's been kind of pulled along. He hasn't really had a huge amount of choice in it, but at a certain point he's like, no, I'm taking this in a different direction. Yeah, I wonder what your thoughts are on that, Tori.
Yeah, I just want to be clear, like, so so this is what often happens is like I advocate for climate fiction that we need more hope in the world. We need more hopeful stories. We need more solution-based stories. And I don't think that that's at the detriment of the truth. So if there's catastrophe that's happening, people who live on the front lines of this climate crisis in the Caribbean, in some of the hotter areas like India and Pakistan, their life is catastrophe right now. And not everybody, but there's these big destructive things that are happening to people. I don't want to sweep those things and just have this rosy picture, of all the nice things that are happening in the world. We have to live with the catastrophe that we've made. But the problem I see, and the reason I shine a light on like the climate solutions and hope, is that I just don't think if you balance this out in how many kind of depictions on the news or stories you read that are dystopian, there's no balance. It's just like it's unbalanced to like 100 to 1. For every one really hopeful, cool, original story that you're going to read, you're going to find the movie Alien, or some cyberpunk story that is talking about a corporation that is paying you 5 cents a day so that you're because a robot took your job or something. You know what I mean? Like, so catastrophe exists. It's just that I hope that we could dial up a little more of the hope and solutions that we need to get us to that clean, green, and just world that we want. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I just know that, I think it's important that, we can't just sweep catastrophe under the rug, because those people who are living in those catastrophes, that's their story, that's their life. And there's moments of hope in those, they're helping each other, and how they come together for mutual aid, is a place where I could see, you're talking about catastrophe, but you're also talking about people coming together to kind of help each other in those moments too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. I'm seeing a question in here that is also a curiosity of mine in this novel, which is about um, narrative and memory. And I'm thinking about how story is such a through line. There's this myth in the Cloud Cuckoo Land myth that carries through, but it's also always changing, that there's like the text gets degraded and it gets retranslated, and it gets Zeno's sort of like putting his own way of seeing the world into this myth that is centuries and centuries old. And I'm curious about that, like how our understanding of a story changes based on who's telling it, who's passing it on, like
Yeah. what culture
and
they're
and
from.
we talked a little bit, and yeah, we talked a little bit in the breakout time about like technology and how that changes how a story gets passed on. And um I don't know that I'm like asking an actual question, but I'm curious about
Yeah.
your thoughts on that, the sort of like the fragmenting and the putting back together and the like recreation over time.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's true is that we all tell stories differently, even the same story. We were talking about the game of telephone being a perfect example of this, right? And so I think we need to live in a world where, or we do live in a world where not every story is the exact same. So, or even the same telling, and that's okay because that's what makes it interesting and different and exciting and culturally relevant for those particular people. So I'm fine with living in a story where memory and story change. Um, and I don't know if I would call those unreliable. I would just call it
Mm.
different, right? You know, if you have a written story, of course, like that makes it so its permanence is like a little bit more. But then
Mhm.
what you brought up around translation, in that moment when you start to translate what something meant from, let's use the Bible as example and how many translations there's been. Um, yeah, they're just like the meaning isn't the same even in time. So it really is for you to kind of like understand what that meaning to that story is. And so, and then it's going to be different for each person and what you take away. So I'm kind of okay with like stories kind of having um gaps, being different. And I think that's just a part of like how stories exist in the world, that they change over time. They're not permanent. We had a conversation about this though that I want to bring to this discussion. I'm just going to leave it here about I used to think things that are digital are permanent. And I was like, oh, if it's on the internet, like my story, like all these stories that we've produced, I think 42 stories over the last 4 years, climate fiction, short stories. And then I was invited to a conference about the impermanence of things that are digital. And there was all these great projects that they were going through and talking about, and how, this one project had 22 stories. They were great. People loved them. They were all about the ocean. And then the philanthropist who had funded it kind of, was like, all right, I'm moving on to another thing. And then the project didn't have enough money to kind of host it online. So then all the stories just disappeared. And I was like, whoa. And so that's why we have moved into the world of books. We're trying to get as many of these stories that we publish digitally into books because they end up in the Library of Congress, they're in people's shelves, and they exist in the real world, and they can be passed on, and they live as long as they can. So yeah, there's just something to say about that too, around, the fallacy. Like I used to think that things were digital. I was like, oh, it's good. It's on the internet. It'll be here forever. But that's not true. Once that server goes down and someone doesn't pay that bill, the thing is gone. And it's kind of, there's something to be said about things that are written down, which also don't have permanence too. So stories just don't have permanence unless we like can kind of like pass them along and they live with us. So there's something to be said about that and all this too.
Yeah, I love that. And it is really fascinating because I went until you told me that story, I had not been aware that like, yeah, we think of the things that are living in the digital world as being like maybe not permanent, but like having some sort of longevity, and yet they could be gone in an instant in the same way that, a library can burn down, and then you have the loss of all of these texts that have existed for sometimes very lengthy period of time. And yeah, it's really fascinating.
But
Yeah.
I know we have other questions, but I just want to linger here for a second. But the one thing I do like about a library that's even different, the one thing I like about a library that's different than just like a digital product, like for instance, unless I syndicate the stories that we publish, they only exist on Grist. With a library, this book is in like 2,000 libraries across the United States. So one library burdens down, it still exists. If my digital collection goes away on Grist, there's a couple of stories that have been syndicated in a couple places, but it doesn't exist in a way that it's like that replication where it's like it's there's something built in with the library system that like makes it so that it's a little bit more permanent, at least in modern libraries. The Constantinoples of the world, when they got sacked and things got destroyed, it was a big deal because there wasn't like this library system we have that's modern. But yeah, it's just, yeah. So digital, like last piece on this is the Pacific Standard was a news organization that Grist acquired. And half of the reason we acquired it's not because we're going to keep, like all the employees kind of went on to do their own thing. It was to kind of keep the stories online that they had produced over the course of 7 or 8 years. It was like that library piece.
I love that. And I do, this is not a question in the chat, but it is a question that I have that I just want to throw out because it's relevant to what you're saying. There's this point at the end of the novel, and hopefully this is not spoiling it for anyone, but Constance, I think, realizes that the ship is not in space. The ship never actually left Earth. And in the process of trying to escape from it, she destroys Sybil, which is the sort of like digital holder of basically all the knowledge that humans could put in there before whatever happened. And so she's left with like this little book that she has trained on, like, to her child. And I'm really curious about that. Like, that was a really fascinating moment for me, that like this like vast repository of knowledge that was stored digitally, at least in my reading, seemed to be destroyed. And then there's just this like little book that's like this little myth from centuries before that then lives on in this new world, whatever this new world is. Yeah, so fascinated by that.
Yeah.
There's some good questions in the chat, and I know that we're coming to the end of our time, but one of the questions is about the trusty friend, like that there's this kind of through line of trusty friend, at least in parts of the stories. So you have Seymour, who feels like this very deep soul connection with this owl who he calls trusty friend. And then you have Zeno, who's like sort of almost tragically in love with this man with whom he serves in the army, who Rex, who signs the letters to him, your trusty friend. And I wonder about the idea of trust within storytelling, the idea of trust within particularly like climate stories, and what, I don't know, what resonance that might have for you, Tory.
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of story types and we categorize them. Like I've been trying to categorize them slowly over the years, and they're just for people's knowledge on this call, the main way that we get stories is we run a contest that is open. It's an open call for submissions for climate fiction that is hopeful, green, just, and sustainable, and intersectional characters and very culturally relevant to the area of which they come from. And we get around 1,000 stories a year. So we review those stories, and I see a lot of different structure. And one of the main tried and true structures is like your chosen family theme, or your community, that you are living in a, because the challenge I think people have with like trying to tell a story that is hopeful, or some people even call utopian, is that, where's the challenge in that? Where's like the kind of like the bad guy? Where's the story arc where they have to go through kind of this trials and tribulation. But what I've found, I don't know if this is answering the question around a trusty friend, but the thing, they trust in their community to be able to pull them through. And so a lot of the stories, or some of them, are around trusting that other person to do what they need to do and what they've been trained to do and what you hope that they would do because they're a friend of yours, they're a community member, and they come through for you. It also shows that even in a utopian society, there's going to be interpersonal relationships, and there's no utopian to interpersonal relationships. They're just hard, you know? And so there's ups and downs. And so a lot of the stories focus more on that. So sometimes, most of the time, the person is the trustworthy friend. A good example is like, there's a story that we have called Canvas Wax Moon. And I always like to highlight the story because it shows the kind of climate fiction and highlights the kind of climate fiction we want to see. The majority of the story is pretty light touch on the climate part of it. And it's more about a woman who is going through a miscarriage. In the family that is there, the trustworthy friends that are there to help this woman through that miscarriage. Um, and the reason I like to highlight that is, one, is because it's like trustworthy family story that exists, but also there's a benefit to telling a story that, you know, like most women have had something like this, or I think it's like it's high percentage numbers of women who've experienced this. But if you ask anyone around a climate fiction story, has your character experienced this? There's not many stories with that. Why is that? We need more relatable stories. And so I know I'm going on a tangent around, like, you know, like having culturally irrelevant stories and why they matter. But that was a beautiful story around like the community trust around something that's very personal and the community coming together to support this woman.
And I love that. That's a great example of like the humanizing of the stories, you know, the relatability of them. And that like not all climate stories are like hitting you over the head with climate, you know, and I think you could say this about this novel too. It's a very strong through line, but it's not, I don't know. We don't have Anthony Doerr here. If we did, we could ask him if he considers this a climate novel, but it certainly is woven through these beautiful human stories. Um, I am very sorry to say that we are out of time, which is unfortunate because there is so much more we could discuss in this novel, and you have put such beautiful comments and questions in the chat. So thank you so much for being here to discuss, and thank you so much, Tory, for being here to have this rich discussion about Cloud Cuckoo Land, which is I'm gonna say one of my favorite novels that I've read, certainly in recent years. So has some bits and pieces to send us on our way, but thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. Madeline.
Here we are. Oh my gosh, thank you, thank you. I was jumping out of my seat as I responded to the amazing chat, which I will save and send to you all in a follow-up because it was bouncing. But thank you so much, Ash and Tory, and each of you. The BTS Center has had a really great summer fiction reading extravaganza over the course of these 3 months. And I just had someone in the chat tell me they read all 3 books. And so, yeah, just feels like such an amazing opportunity to walk this walk together. So what comes next? This is the last session. We are developing discussion guides for each of the 3 books we're engaging with this summer. And so we hope that you will bring Northwoods, Future Home of the Living God, and Cloud Cuckoo Land to your own neighborhood book club or congregation or community, and that these discussion guides will make this extra doable for you. So Oh, you can't get enough of BTS or of Grist. That's coming too. I'm going to tell you now about a couple things coming down the pipeline. The first being our big BTS event of the year, which is Convocation. And I know that a couple of you are already signed up for that. But if you're not and you would like to, let me just pop this in the chat. We still have some slots available for our online companions. What is Convocation, you may ask? If you don't know, it's the BTS's annual legacy event. And this year we're focused on the theme of hope in small places, becoming people of refugee of faith, with keynote speakers Deborah Rienstra and Reverend Mariama White-Hammond, along with some creative and contemplative immersion opportunities, some Lectio Terra. So hop on board with that. It's going to be a really rich couple of days. Also, if you're like books, I just want to be in Bookland. We're doing both a book study with Brian McLaren around, oh, Ash is going to pop this in the chat. I can see you in there. Thank you. With Brian McLaren around his book, Life After Doom. So that's a 5-part book study with Assistant Director Nicole Dieroff and Reverend Stephanie Perdue, who also led the discussion around Future Home of the Living God, for those of you who are around for that, as well as this singular evening with the author Brian McLaren. And that book has been really important for us at the BTS Center. And we would love to have you all back this fall. And with that, Tori, I'll kick it over to you for a moment or two to talk about the exciting things happening at Grist.
Yeah, I just wanted to leave you all with one or two things. One is in the chat, you'll see that I put it's like our about page for Imagine 2200. You can read about like what we're about, what we've been doing for the last 4 years. And then at the bottom of that page has all the collections that we have produced. There's been 4 of them. You can also, most of the stories there's like an audio. So if you want to take them to go, you can just listen to them. And the other thing is to bring your attention to the fact that we have a book coming out, which most of these stories you can read for free. But again, they're online, the link that I provided, but it's kind of nice to kind of have it as a book. And, after you read a few short stories, 1 or 2 I can read online, but then after a while I'm like, my eyes, I want to like take this outside and not or read it on my porch. So if you're more of a book person, you can get some of our best stories in that new book that's coming out in October. It's called Metamorphosis. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Tori. And with that, I'm going to send you bookworms on your merry way. Ash, Tori, and I all hope that you might go in peace and feel inspired as fiction readers. And thank you all, and many blessings to you. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.